Good evening. I'll now call the City of Cannon Falls City Council meeting for Tuesday, October the 2nd, 2012 to order. Roll call.
Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Thomas.
Where? Here.
Holst.
Here.
Johnson. Here. Mattson.
Here.
McCusker.
Yep.
And Mayor Robinson.
Here. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. At this time, the chair will take a motion to approve the amended agenda as submitted.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. This time we'll move on to item 5 this evening, which is the public input. Citizens may speak to issues not on the agenda. Before speaking, please give your name and address for the minutes, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing as there's no one here to speak to us, we'll move on to item 6, the consent agenda. Items on this area of the agenda may be adopted, or they may be removed and placed on the business area of the agenda for discussion purposes before approving. For those folks at home, I will read the consent agenda. Item A is the just and correct claims for the accounting period ending September the 28th, 2012. Item B is the meeting minutes for the September 18th, 2012 City Council meeting. Item C, Resolution 1981 authorizing no trespassing signs. Item D, MMUA Safety Management Program contract renewal. And item E, purchase of a new 1445 John Deere mower. Are there any items anybody wishes to bring down? Seeing there are none, I will take a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. This time we'll move on to council business. Item A, which will be the cable franchise renewal.
Mayor and Council, good evening. Bob Vos, I'm an attorney at Kennedy and Graven. You have retained me to help you with the pending cable franchise renewal with Mediacom, and Aaron and staff invited me down to go through the short memo that I know that you've received from me about how franchise renewal works. I guess I wanted to do 3 things. Obviously, Mayor and Council, I'm here to respond to whatever you want me to do regarding the renewal, but what I was thinking about doing was just briefly explaining the process to you, a minute or 2 or 3, telling you what direction I think I need and the staff needs at this relatively early point in the renewal process, and then to the extent you want to, talk about those specific franchise terms that I've laid out in the memo that I think, in my experience, are the most important terms typically that get negotiated in cable franchises. So first thing, the process. I know a question I always get asked by the cities that I work with that are dealing with cable franchise renewals is, why in the world are we worried about this or talking about this now? In your case, your franchise with Mediacom doesn't expire until mid-early 2015, so we are 2.5 years before the expiration of the franchise. And obviously a franchise, I think, is something that you've heard about or are familiar with. Franchise is fundamentally a contract, but it's also oddly an ordinance. It's both things. But it's similar to a license or a permit. You see them all the time. You see them probably at virtually every meeting in some form or another. And of course, permits, whether it's a peddler's permit or a CUP or a whatever permit, licenses, liquor license, any other kind of license, you have an application and the council deals with it in a matter of months, maybe less than in a matter of months. So why, with a cable franchise, why years in advance? And the really short answer, and I don't mean to be sort of smart alecky about it, but the really short answer is because federal law governs this, governs cable franchise renewals, and federal law simply says they start 3 years prior to expiration. And the way that it starts is the cable operator sends you a letter, which Mediacom has done. You, the city, the franchising authority, are obligated to start doing something related to the renewal within a relatively short period of time. You have in front of you a letter from me back to the cable company saying that you've done that, saying you've started thinking about cable franchise renewal. And so the letter from the company, the response from the city. That is the process. We've confirmed the city's rights, and the cable company has confirmed its rights in this renewal process. I mentioned that it's a federal law that governs cable franchise renewals. Let me summarize again in a minute or less what that federal law does. Essentially what it does is, unlike all those other permits, licenses, franchises that you've got with other utilities, unlike all of those where you, the city council, can approve them or deny them if you have a reason to deny them, unlike those kind of licenses, Congress has stepped in and said, cable companies, because they make an investment in plant in your community, we're going to give them a right to basically an assured renewal when their contract, when their franchise comes up, unless the franchising authority, the city, can show one of two things. Can show either that the company has behaved poorly, has not performed well over the past term, and you've given them notice of that, or looking forward, you have identified needs going forward related to cable television, and the company won't agree to meet them. And of course, what that means is they won't agree to a franchise, a contract, with provisions that address those concerns that you, the city council, identify. So fundamentally, that is what goes on for this 3-year, give or take a few month process, is you, the city, take a look at how the company has done for the last 15 years, that was the length of their prior franchise, and you look forward to figure out what it is your community needs in relation to cable television, and we then sit down and attempt to deal with it, negotiate it with Mediacom, with the cable company. That's fundamentally what goes on in this process. What do most cities do to address that process? They hire typically a lawyer. You've done that to negotiate and to advise you about what legal implications there are to various provisions in the franchise. A lot of cities will hire an auditor, a financial auditor, and I believe staff has either done that or is working on doing that. And what the auditor would typically do is review the payments that you've received from Mediacom. You understand, I think, from the memo and from being on the council, you understand that the company has paid you several forms of consideration for holding the franchise. They pay a franchise fee, which is 5% of their revenues generated here in Cannon Falls. They pay you a per subscriber PEG fee, public educational governmental access fee, to support the cameras and the programming that you do. And at the outset of the prior 15-year franchise, they made a grant, a $25,000 grant payment to you. So they've made a number of payments to you. They are ongoing payments. A lot of cities will hire an auditor to make sure that the company has calculated those payments to you correctly and has paid you the correct amount. And I will tell you, I don't want to suggest to you that I know anything about Mediacom's payments to you, Cannon Falls in particular, but I will tell you that several clients that I work with have audited Mediacom and have found underpayments by Mediacom. And so I would encourage staff to continue down the road of either hiring or working with the auditor that's already been hired. A lot of cities will hire a technical consultant to come in and take a look at the cable plant. Is the cable plant that serves the residents of your city, is it an adequate plant? I will tell you, I'm not a huge fan of cities spending money on that, candidly. Most cable operators, Mediacom included, today have fairly modern cable systems. I don't know anything about the Cannon Falls system in particular, but most operators have an adequate system, and technical consultants aren't going to find fundamental flaws in the system, and so in a lot of cases that can be money wasted. Another thing that a lot of cities do is use a vendor of equipment, like the cameras, vendor of cameras and other audio and visual equipment that you make use of to provide programming in the city. Bring in those vendors to tell you about what sort of replacement equipment you might need, get some prices, get some quotes on that equipment, get a configuration for maybe a better way to lay out the equipment. In other words, get advice from a vendor about that community programming equipment. That's useful, obviously, in negotiating for that compensation, that consideration from the company to pay for the replacement equipment that you may well want to have. Some cities hire a survey company to come in and do a survey. I don't think you're going to do that here, candidly. And then some cities hire, big cities up in the metro, hire facilitators to come in and run public meetings. And mayor and council, I suspect you have plenty of public meetings and don't need a facilitator to do that. So those are the kind of consultants that cities will often hire in cable franchise renewals. I think the staff and I would like some direction on whether any of the consultants I've named there other than the auditor, because again, I think that's in process. Whether you want to do the technical review of the cable system, whether you want to bring in a vendor and have Mike, your access coordinator, work with the vendors that he knows to nail down some equipment prices and some equipment configurations, and whether you think you need any other kinds of consultants. So that, in a really short way, is the process. It doesn't need to take 3 years. I will just flat out acknowledge that to you right now. That is simply a legal requirement that we get started. Again, quite candidly, for the next year or so here at the beginning, I probably won't have a great deal of interaction with your staff or with you. At the beginning, what we do is we simply do the audit. We bring in the consultant to take a look at the equipment and give us some feedback, and we work through that. And then after a year or so, with a year and a half or so remaining on the franchise, that's the point at which we actually sit down with the company and start to negotiate. That's the process. I've told you about the direction that the staff is looking for. The memo that you have in front of you, I won't bore you with all the details. I would just point you to a couple of the big terms. I talked to Mike prior to the meeting, community programming, and that what I'm talking about again is the cameras and the equipment and the technology that you use to provide coverage of meetings like this meeting tonight. That's an important area. There are sort of 3 subset issues that I've broken out. One is, do you have enough channels? You currently have 1 channel for that kind of programming. Plenty of cities your size, your demographics have more than 1 channel for that kind of programming, and so you might want to look to the company to provide 1 or more additional channels. The funding I've already talked about. I will just tell you, your franchise, your current franchise, $25,000 capital grant, $1.25 per customer fee to pay for community programming, and a franchise fee of 5%. That is pretty close to industry standard for a community like this. I suspect if you want to continue to support community programming, we will be, in effect, defending that arrangement. I think it's unlikely that you're going to see a larger capital grant or a much larger PEG fee, and you can't go higher than 5% of gross revenues. So I don't think you're going to be looking to ratchet upward. We're going to be defending that if the council is interested in continuing to fund community programming. Live sites, you've got several sites in town where you can actually go out with a camera and provide live programming of sporting events or parades. You may want some additional sites, and you certainly can ask for that. So that's community programming. That's always a hot issue. Another issue is how long do you want the term to be? The current franchise is 15 years. That has always been the standard in cities in Minnesota. That has changed in the last couple of years. The reason is because there is a belief that the legislature may step in, and cable companies actually have been pushing for shorter terms. They used to want longer terms. There is a belief that the legislature may step in and take this authority away from cities, regulate cable TV at the state level rather than giving that authority to cities. If that were to happen, cable companies want to be able to take advantage of that, and so they're now asking for shorter terms on their franchises. In the past, they wanted longer terms. So that's an issue ultimately we want direction from the council on. Service area I just mentioned, again, I don't know yet anything about your community other than it's very pretty. I drove around for a half hour before the meeting and it looks great. I don't know anything about your community though. I don't know if the cable company, if Mediacom currently serves every human being in town, or if there are parts of town where the cable company does not provide service. If that is the case, they've been here for a long time. They've had plenty of time, in my opinion. They've had plenty of time to build out their plant to serve everybody, and so if that is something you agree with and you'd like to see the company do, we should put some pressure on the company to build out to all areas of your city. So I know that you are known for running a tight meeting. I will stop talking and be happy to answer any questions.
When we start talking about service area, as we start with the expansion of the hospital and the interchange and stuff like that, I mean, there might be some place that we start looking to say, okay, or do we have service out beyond, you know, those points when we start looking at those areas? And when we start negotiating, I mean, things like channels that a lot of customers and citizens come to us for to say, hey, we're not getting these channels, and we've tried to talk to these people and they won't even answer us. You know, they're, you know, just like talking to, you know, this block of wood sometimes when you talk to Mediacom and try to get to people to maybe get HD channels and things of that nature that aren't provided here. I mean, why should Minneapolis be any different than Cannon Falls if they've got that same service? I mean, is that something that can be negotiated also as we go forward?
Mayor and council members, one of my jobs is to deliver unpleasant news as well as try and negotiate a good deal. Mayor, to your question, absolutely that's something that cities can negotiate for. It's absolutely something I would expect you to seek in negotiations if you're dissatisfied, if your residents are dissatisfied with the service selection. That's absolutely something we take to the table. However, I got to tell you, the U.S. Supreme Court, in its wisdom, has decided that the choice of channels that cable operators will provide to their customers is a First Amendment choice. That is, in other words, the cable company is speaking when they provide video programming to their customers, and the government, you, have a limited ability to tell Mediacom what speech they have to provide. You can negotiate for it, but at the end of the day, as far as saying, we're not granting you a franchise unless you give us the USA channel, we have quite limited authority to do that. But having said that, yes, we can negotiate for that.
Well, I know as Robbie was saying, we do have also current residents that do not have the ability to get service, and we need to have that addressed.
Yep.
I mean, I understand in your bullet point here about the 30 residents per mile and all that, but small towns, that issue's not gonna work. So we gotta have that addressed.
Yeah, and Councilmember, if I can just say, what I'm telling you there is that historically, typically in Minnesota, cable franchises all around the state talk about the obligation to build out where there is that density of homes. And I guess your point is that doesn't work in a community like Cannon Falls, and maybe it never did work. And I won't disagree with you about that. I guess what I'm saying is that even if it did once work, when the cable company was new and they were just building out their system for the first time, the argument that we should only have to build out to dense areas might have made sense. You may not agree, but it might have made sense then. But today, they've been here for a long time. And they've had a chance now to fill in the parts of town where they weren't originally able to provide service. So I completely agree after the period of years. I mean, it's been more than 15 years, as I understand it. It wasn't the first franchise 15 years ago. So you've had cable TV service here for more than 15 years. It seems to me at some point the city is going to want to say, well, you ought to serve everybody in town. Forget about density. Serve every human being that lives in the city. And the city certainly can take that position.
When in the letter you said that they're going to refuse to do the terms that they're operating under at this time. Was that a ploy, or do they mean to go against everything that they're doing right now?
Well, Councilmember, good point. I guess in saying that, well, first of all, the indication that you, Cannon Falls, have about that is when they sent you the letter saying we want to renew our franchise, they sent you the draft franchise that they use all around the country. I mean, this company operates in 40 states out of 50 or whatever it is, and they sent you the form franchise they send every city when they ask for renewal. And that form franchise literally, I mean, I'm not exaggerating, literally would have ratcheted back on almost every provision that you've got in your current franchise. It would have been disadvantageous to the city in almost every way.
So it was a formal thing for them to do at first to start negotiations. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's that they're drawing their line, their first line in the sand about this is where we want to start. Now, you know, that's a general observation. Specifically, though, you know, I'm working with Moose Lake right now that's kind of at the tail end of their renewal. It's a city that's a bit similar to you in demographically and in terms of what they do for community programming, et cetera, et cetera. In that case, the company is quite firmly negotiating against community programming support that is less than the support that you receive under your current franchise. And I have that same experience in other communities. So I'm just telling you that the company's position has been in other communities that they would prefer not to continue support like they've got in their current franchise in Cannon Falls. So I'm just telling you to anticipate that they're going to try and move back, undercut their commitment in the current franchise. I think it's well within the city's rights to say, we'll concede that we're not going to try and ratchet that way up, but we're not going to give ground on that issue.
You're saying you won't concede on points that we've already established. But that brings us to another point, though. You're mentioning Moose Lake. I looked on the internet. A tool, sometimes it can be useful.
Network.
Occasionally.
Yeah,
Anyway, and I noticed that there are some lawsuits progressing now against Mediacom from other cities. I wonder if how they progress will have an effect on negotiations over the next 2 or 3 years, if some cities will win some points or lose some points and be forced them to retract some things, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, council member, I guess, I'm not sure if I know exactly which lawsuits you were
Well,
seeing,
there
but,
are a number,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, but the fact of the matter is, and I suppose one of the reasons that you select legal counsel like me that has done work with this company in a number of other cities is, again, quite candidly, I'm going to bring to the table for you other deals that I've negotiated with this company. And so, yes, to the extent we negotiate a good deal over in City X, I certainly want to bring that to bear on City Y. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So if we prevail in Moose Lake, we'll certainly be reminding them of that at the table here in Cannon Falls. And so, hopefully in the next year or two, I'll prevail on some negotiations in a way that's beneficial to you.
And the other thing is, the ones you'll be negotiating with, and I don't know how you do this in legal parlance when you say if they comply to help the city's social structure, if they damage it, if they help it or something. That's a subjective thing. Do you go by numbers? Do you go by, how do you judge something like that, or how do you negotiate a point like that when you're discussing it?
Well, it's interesting. It's a great question. There is a case out there in the world, a legal decision out there that basically says the following: whatever you, the city council, decide is what your community needs in relation to cable TV is what your community needs in relation to cable TV. So that's a long way of saying you don't need to necessarily back it up with a bunch of statistics and a survey done by Decision Resources on the phone or whatever.
Right.
It's nice.
Right.
Obviously, as your negotiator, it's nice if I've got more facts to back up whatever it is we're demanding. But at the end of the day, what you, the city council, decide is what your community needs is, after all, what you got elected to do. And that legally is correct. What you decide your community needs is what your community needs. Now, so that takes us to that point. Now, there is something else in this federal renewal law that says they have to meet those needs that you decide exist in your community, but the needs have to be reasonable in light of the cost of meeting them.
And who decides that?
That's really fudgy.
Who
That's
decides
really,
that?
Well, at the end of the day, who decides that is an administrative law judge if we have an impasse. There is a administrative process for working out these renewals if we really reach an impasse, not dissimilar from labor negotiations if you have those ever occurring here, where you actually go to an administrative law judge who decides whether what the city is demanding is reasonable or not in light of the cost for the company to meet them, all right? I guess what I'm saying, and this is getting a little bit rambling, but what I'm saying is, to the extent you want to continue current obligations, I personally believe that it's going to be hard for a third-party administrative law judge to find that that position is unreasonable. After all, the company has been meeting that need for some time.
Right, right.
How can they say that it's unreasonable in light of the cost of doing it, given that they've been doing it here for 15 years?
Exactly. Right.
So,
Yeah.
we haven't had that debate in front of an ALJ yet, but that's the position I think we would take.
I'll let you off with just one more question, if you would.
They're good ones. Keep them coming.
No, but the one under franchise fee, the one that it caught my eye, that note, however, that the current franchise requires the city to dedicate at least 50% of franchise fees receipts to support local, public, educational, governmental programming on the cable system. The city should consider whether to continue this arrangement. Franchise fees are legally unrestricted and could be dedicated to the general fund absent a franchise provision requiring dedication to a specific use. Does that mean that the full 50%, or could you negotiate down to, say, 30-20 or 25-25?
Yep, Councilmember, what I'm saying is that forget about what you've contracted for. There is no law in Minnesota or federally that says franchise fees must be used in part or in whole on community programming. Franchise fees go in the city's general fund if the city wants, legally.
Okay.
Now, you've contracted here, you've negotiated to spend 50% of that on community programming, and that's well within that council's, your prior council that
Right.
negotiated that, well within their purview to do that. This council, though, can make a different decision if this council wants to, and I just have to bring that to your attention. I'm certainly not suggesting that spending franchise fees on community programming is a bad idea. Personally, my
No.
personal view on that is irrelevant, but that's up to you to decide. Legally, you can do that.
And the other thing is, I'm glad we're taking an auditor and we're going to do what you suggested. The other things, can they be put in as this process continues, or not put in different dates? I mean, you don't have to decide right now about some of the other things that we could do or not do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to decide tonight. I
You
just
have to
want
decide
to,
now.
I want to just tee up the direction that I and Aaron and Mike need on what other consultants you may want to look to. And, you know, if you, the answer is, great, do the audit, and we've got the lawyer now, and that's all the consultants we want to spend money on, that's okay too. I have plenty of cities that don't even do the audit, and we just have to work with what we got, so.
Yeah, I think in talking about it, we know that the audit's one we want to bring forward. So actually, the proposal that we received, and it's from an audit company that specializes in doing this in a lot of Minnesota cities, that'll be at the Cable Commission's next meeting for their review. So once they review it, and if they're okay with it, it'll hopefully be on the next council agenda to get that signed off on and approved for the, to get the audit done. Because Bob's right, there's a number of cities that have done these, and with all the cable companies, and you know, some have found significant amounts of underpayments that had to get repaid, because there's no way that we know how to keep track of this. You know, we can't, we don't know their books, we don't know what they're doing, so it's difficult for us as staff to be able to monitor it, so that's why these audits are done, so it just makes sense. So we'll have that hopefully after the Cable Commission reviews it, it'll be at the next agenda for approval. But other than that, the only thing that we thought was just having the vendors come in and give us those ideas about upgrades and what we need and that sort of stuff. That's a free thing. They want to do it because obviously they want to give us proposals to get the
Well-
equipment upgraded when they can. So those are the only two things that we think we want to do. And like I said, the vendor one doesn't cost anything, so we really don't need much, you know, we don't really need any approval or anything for that. And then as far as the audit goes, that does, but we'll have that in the next agenda after the Cable Commission reviews it, so.
Aaron, on these live sites, do we have any, it says we can have 3 and then later 3 more. Is there any site other than City Hall that is currently a live
Well,
site?
we do from the baseball field for the baseball and football
Okay.
games, and we do at the high school as well.
Okay, so we could
Yep.
do 3 more if we wanted to.
Right, yep.
Or put it in a future agreement
Yep.
if we
yep,
thought
could
there was
have
other
more.
sites.
And we may have a couple other now that just aren't active. Mike would probably know for sure, but we might have some that are other locations that we're just not maybe using yet.
Because obviously with the new auditorium at the school, that's a big one.
Right, yeah, in the location too, I mean, one's at the school, but it's not where it needs to be now.
Well, yeah.
With that new auditorium and those sort of things, so yeah.
Okay.
Yep, we can definitely take a look at, but we want to keep that, and honestly, with the way we're expanding the system, we want to add to that number, so we can televise more live events and, you know, things like that.
I'd also like the Cable Commission to make sure when they have a meeting, to make sure the public knows that they can come in and talk to the Cable Commission about the service and things that they are seeing here in the city so that they can report back to the council.
It's next Wednesday we have it.
Okay, I mean, we've got time to do that. I mean, it doesn't have to be done next Wednesday or that. I mean, we've got 3 years here.
Right.
In the long run. But the thing is, the more input we have from the local community as to, will help us to decide the needs as we move forward with this franchise and when we start the small negotiation piece that we have. I mean, the other one, the audit and the sites and stuff like that are bigger pieces, but, and the service to the other places are bigger pieces. But the other little pieces that we hear about, you know, once the franchise fees is already in place, I mean, I think that's what the public needs to come to the Cable Commission and let us know.
Yeah, once we kind of get the process going here, the Cable Commission will start discussing it, and then we'll advertise and hold a public hearing to let people come in to the Cable Commission, kind of express their concerns, stuff like that, and that way we'll have a formal record too that we've kind of done it, and we're getting a better handle on it. And internally as staff, we'll also work on that too, because we know there's areas that MediaCom doesn't serve that they should, or we think they should, and it's not only residential. You know, we have business areas where if MediaCom served, it would open it up for, high-speed internet and things like that hasn't been there, and that we've been fighting to try to get them there, and they've been very unreceptive to that. There's a bunch of that stuff internally that we'll do, and then we'll have that public hearing for the citizens to comment to the Cable Commission as well.
Hey, Robbie, I want to ask a few questions, Bob.
Sure.
And after we had that last meeting about starting this process, I thought about it for a couple weeks, and I called Aaron one day, so I'm glad to see Bob's here tonight because I'd like to run some things by you, and this will help Aaron out. He doesn't have to listen to me like he does normally. So some of the things I wrote down, or I did ask Aaron about this part of it, I said, why, I didn't realize we had a 15-year last time. I thought we had a 5-year. But I did ask Aaron why we would go that long out. To me, a 2 to 5 year agreement would be plenty. The problem is with agreeing out 15 years, if things aren't going well, you're kind of stuck with the legal end. Instead of the contract running out, you can do something else. So I really have a problem with going out on a 15-year agreement. The other thing is, you talked about getting a tech study done because of the date and the age of the cables and all this. And I can tell you from my perspective that that would be a good thing, but it'd be a waste of time because their system is in tough shape. I mean, I just had to put in a new underground cable to my place just 2 weeks ago. It took over 6 weeks to get them and 3 trips to the place to finally get the right tech there and said, oh, my goodness, the wires are shot up here. And I could look at them and see they didn't even look like wires. So we do have an outdated system, and I don't see them big on updating and replacing their system. So to hire a tech support to study that, if you just get the opinions from people in town, there's a lot of them having problems, and that concerns me. The other thing is that the fees that they can charge concern me. I don't know how that's regulated, and I don't need an answer tonight, but I do know I started out at $18 cable, and now today I think I'm at $79 cable. I've been in business in town here for 40-some years, and I can't make that kind of money in my business. I don't quite know how that works without somebody having some kind of a say about it. So evidently, the last contract, we must not have any say in what can be charged. Now, we probably can't, but that would be a concern of mine. The other thing that I'd like to see is that we somehow, through this contract system, we can keep ourselves open to other things. I told Aaron, it's the fine print in this contract that scares me, that we get into this and then 2 years from now we get some company that comes in, wants to do broadband, and all of a sudden now we realize there's something in that contract that ties them into it too. I'm concerned about that, to keep it open for broadband. And I guess that's just some of them I can think of right now, but I know there's a lot of other ones that hopefully people will respond to this, come to the Cable Commission, or at least send their emails to our Cable Commission and give them their input. But the service hasn't always been good. And the last thing I want is problems. So I'm not sitting here and condemning them. Every business has its problems, but there has always been service issues, and I hear about them a lot because I'm in the service business, and sometimes I can't even get at my calls because the cable guy's there and they're so mad they can't even think because the cable hasn't worked right for 2 weeks. So I see a lot of issues out there. But I just have a problem with that we're going to negotiate something for 15 years too. That really bothers me. So thank you for lending me an ear and coming down and giving us some ideas on this stuff. Thank you.
Counselor, let me knock down the 4 things that you raised. First, let me go in inverse order. You want to be open to other things. I take it you mean you'd like to have the potential for competition to MediaCom, a provider come in here and actually provide competitive services, video, voice, high-speed data. It's a great point. Let me just name some cities that actually have competitive providers that are not so different than your city. St. Peter, Minnesota, MediaCom was the incumbent there, has a competitor, Faribault. Grand Rapids, Hibbing, all have, MediaCom is the incumbent, all now have competitive providers. So it is not impossible. It's not unheard of. It does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. The company, it's a great point you've raised, the company, MediaCom, will want language in this franchise renewal that will restrict your ability, the City Council's ability, to grant approvals to a competitor. In other words, they will attempt to get negotiated language that will limit your authority to let competition happen.
And we don't.
We will, absent you saying otherwise, we will oppose that vigorously. That is not good policy. I'm not here to set policy, but I will tell you my personal view on that one. That's not good policy. And so that is a great issue to point out. The city, I think, will oppose any efforts to limit competition. You want a franchise that's non-exclusive, that allows another company to come here and ask you for a franchise and ask you to compete with Mediacom. And so I hear you loud and clear on that one. Fees, another great point. Here is the answer to your question about how fees are regulated. Again, Congress, in its infinite wisdom, has said cities can have some limited authority to regulate cable rates, but not complete authority. And the way Congress meted that out in 1994, a long time ago, was to say that cities, local franchising authorities, have authority over the basic tier rates. And I will tell you, because we've all lost track of the basic tier versus the expanded basic tier, the basic tier is your over-the-air channels, ABC, NBC, your community programming channels, and that's about it. It's the tier of service that's maybe 15 channels, 20 channels. It's the lowest level of service. And cities for a long time actually did regulate that tier of service. It became extraordinarily expensive for cities to do. You had to use a lawyer. You often had to use an accountant and a lawyer. And so it became expensive. And what happened was, of course, most customers today don't just buy basic. They buy basic and expanded basic and HDTV and, you know, a paper channel movie and other services. So they don't just buy that tier anymore, and everything else is effectively unregulated. So the bottom line of the bill, how much the customer is paying, ends up being unregulated, even though the city is trying very hard to regulate the basic tier rates. So most cities have now gone away from paying attention to that, and I totally understand your frustration with that. Cable companies raise their rates at a rate faster than inflation forever. And so I understand the frustration, but most cities have walked away from that because your authority is so limited. As to tech study, what I'm talking about on tech study there is I'm talking about an independent technology person who would be hired by you to come in and analyze, set up their gigahoots machine to the cable system and test the system to see if it's performing adequately or not. I guess I have a little bit of reservation about cities doing that, and the reason is because the only set of objective standards on how good or how well a cable system operates are promulgated by the Federal Communications Commission, the federal government again. And cable systems, even if they don't look very good when you get the signal in your house, because those standards set by the FCC are so low, almost every cable system passes. So you hire the consultant comes in and says, gee, this isn't a very good system, but of course they pass all the FCC tests. You're left with a consultant's report that says, it's not a very good system, but I can't point to any objective standard that they fail to meet. So that's entirely your call. I would not be disappointed at all if you want to spend a little money on that review. I just don't think you're going to find that this system fails to meet FCC technical standards. You rolled, though, another point into your question about that. Customer service standards are a totally separate matter. How fast the tech person gets out to your house, whether they fix the problem at your house quickly, whether they pick up the phone over at the customer service center when you call, and how quickly they do that, how they deal with billing, how they deal with everything related to the customer, that's an entirely different area that the city really has a great deal of authority to regulate. And if you have particular concerns about the way Mediacom deals with its customers, let's hear about that. Let's hear about it from residents. Let's hear about it from you. And we can specifically write language into this new franchise that addresses that says you must do the following, and then if they don't do it, you'll have penalties or ways to poke the company when they fail to meet those customer service obligations.
So in other words, what you're saying, though, is like now, I think they're only in town 2 days a week for service?
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
You know,
It is theoretically possible, because I've got cities that have done it, to actually require a local office. Require human beings to office here in town that can deal with customer service problems. The company will fight vigorously against that kind of requirement, but it can be done. It's been done in Hibbing. I listed Hibbing.
I could see, though, that if you can be in town for 2 days for service if it's for a cable TV. I understand that. But today, they're selling the internet, and they're making people connect to this internet. We've turned into such a technical area now with everybody's tech. Their internets and they're talking back and forth, and all this stuff is so important that the whole idea that You want to sell cable and you want to take 3 days to get it fixed, that's fine. But you want to sell telephone and you want to sell cable or internet, you can't be here in 3 days. If somebody has an emergency in their house and their phone don't work because you don't do service calls here on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday,
Yeah.
I don't know how that works. That just don't make any sense.
It doesn't work, and it's going to sound now like I'm kind of bashing other levels of government, which I totally don't mean to do, but the telephone component of Mediacom service is regulated by the State Public Utilities Commission. It's not regulated by the city. And the sad fact is that the State Public Utilities Commission has simply said there will be competition in telephone now. And because we allow competition in telephone, we don't really think we need to spend a great deal of time worrying about customer service issues related to telephone. When in fact, in communities like Cannon Falls, there isn't really a great deal of competition for telephone customers. So I don't want to bash the State Public Utilities Commission. They work very hard on a lot of things, but they don't have a great customer service department at the Public Utilities Commission to deal with telephone problems. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't have an easy answer on that. The last thing, and I think it was one of your important points, was the 15-year term. You are expressing exactly the view of most cities for most of the time since cable television has been around. That is, let's have a short contract, not a long one, because when they expire, all of a sudden the cable company gets very interested in coming and meeting with us and writing us letters and talking to us. They get more attentive, and we have the ability to negotiate with them at that point. The concern that I'm telling you that some cities now have is that the legislature may take your authority over cable away. There have been 4, 5, 6 bills proposed in the last 4, 5, 6 years to do just that. They've gotten hearings, they've gotten some traction, they haven't ever passed, but there's been some traction on bills that would take away authority over cable from cities. The belief is, if that were ever to happen, that legislation would leave intact any existing franchises. So, as a hedge against that possibility, many cities are now saying, let's go 15 years in case 2 years from now the legislature takes this away from us. We'll still have 13 years under the franchise that we negotiated. That's way over my pay grade to tell you what the legislature is going to do. I don't know what they're going to do. But that is the concern expressed by some cities. But if you don't buy that concern, or you think it's too speculative to know what the legislature is going to do, the view you're expressing about a shorter term is better is absolutely consistent with what many cities think. So I hear you.
They would, I think they challenge something, an ordinance, state ordinance like that, wouldn't they? Some cities would challenge that in court, I think.
Well, yeah, again, speculative. I don't know what a city would do. I mean, the legislature can regulate the way cities behave to a large degree, so I'm not sure whether that kind of litigation
There's
would
got to
happen.
be a slight balance, and the cities have to have some.
The one thing we can count on from the state legislature is that they will screw us over.
That's a guarantee.
Yeah, I imagine. But
Well, and actually, there's a lot to what you said there, Bill. I mean, it comes to where you cut back on the city support, and now this cable thing is. So I understand, yeah, if you drop the cable thing, and the cable companies can just do whatever they want to do. Hopefully they compete. The city doesn't get any money again, and the city has no control again. I don't know. I mean, people have this attitude they don't want government controlling things. But on the other hand, if we don't have some control, then we don't know what's going to happen. Is there going to be the competition? Is it going to work right?
And I agree with you, Leroy, that the contract should be a lesser period. I'll take my chance with the legislature.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, well, and a lot of these concerns that we've mentioned tonight, they will be coming up during the public meeting, they will be coming up, and they will be part of the contract, and I suppose things won't get heated until we get to the end of the process, towards the end of the process there. Well, we count on you to be here probably more often than you will be in the next year or two, probably.
Yes,
I imagine.
Mayor and Council, I think that you should really anticipate about 6 to 12 months, as I say in the memo, of taking a look at financial issues, taking a look at whether you need to change the technology, replace the equipment, how you're going to do that. Take a look at, if you want to, the technology that the company has, its cable system. Take a good look at that. Use your cable commission to do that. Hear from residents during that time. Once you do that, what I would be recommending to you at that point is that we pull all that together, pull your views on those issues together in a resolution or in something that you adopt as a city council that becomes the template, the roadmap for me and for the administrator and for Mike to follow in negotiating with the company. And obviously, to the extent any council members want to participate in that, that's great, but certainly we need something written that expresses the views that you reach. through
How
this
soon do you have
process.
to have something like that from the?
6 to 12 months is
6 to
fine.
12 months?
Yeah.
And that'll be your reply to their
Well, so
formal
I've
reply.
replied to their request for
Right.
renewal in a letter. Now what happens is they will periodically call and say what's going on, and I will tell them the city is working on identifying the community's needs and looking back at how you've done over the last 15 years, and they're putting that together, and it's going to take some time. And the company's used to hearing that, so.
Okay.
yeah.
The one last question I got for you, what happens if you don't renew it and do anything?
Well, very few cities have denied a renewal, literally said you are not getting a renewal from us, this city, but can it be done? Yes. I mean, it's been done.
25,000 over 15 years for a company that we're supposed to be getting, what, $1 a hookup or something, I don't know.
About 25.
That's not a lot of money.
Yep.
If we don't have some kind of a say and we can't have some kind of partnership to work together on this, what happens if you don't do nothing?
Yeah. Well, if the city literally does nothing, doesn't deny it, doesn't approve it, just kind of says we're not doing anything, eventually the company would sue you and they would prevail because the city actually has to process the renewal. You have to ultimately do something, and I'm not suggesting they wouldn't send lots of nasty grams threatening you first, but ultimately the only way the city can not grant the renewal, i.e. deny the renewal, the only way the city can do that is by complying with the federal renewal process, which, as I've said, ultimately goes to an administrative law judge who decides whether you're being reasonable and they're being unreasonable, or whether it's the other way around. So I'd like to tell you that we could just do that, but legally, we can't do it that way.
Well, once the cables aren't down, we're stuck with it.
That was the wisdom of Congress, was that, other utilities spend money bringing utility services to your city. But cable companies, for some reason, get this special protection from Congress and effectively get guaranteed renewals unless you can prove that they didn't act well in the past, or they're refusing to agree to a fair franchise in the future.
That's why we look at keeping it open to maybe bringing another franchise in the future.
I agree.
So,
Yep. Yep.
thanks, Bob, for coming in. You've answered a lot of questions, and we've got a little work to do over the next 6 to 12 months to come up with what we're feeling and what we're needing, and we look forward to working with you and getting a good contract with whomever it shall be.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 7B, Resolution 1982, receiving feasibility report and calling a hearing on improvement.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you have tonight is the feasibility report for the East Side Phase 1 project, or the 2013 Street Improvement Project. Back in 2009, we put together the capital improvement plan, looked at the entire city, utilities, pavements, storm sewer, all the, water, sewer, the whole thing. And this is figure 1 out of that report, shows the 6 major project areas that report identified. As you know, we are just finishing up West Side 1 right now, and the next on the schedule was East Side 1. After meeting with Public Works this spring and summer, asking them where are their biggest issues with the water and sewer on the east side. Remember, I came to the council earlier with this figure, and we rearranged East Side 1 and East Side 2 to be the blue areas, East Side 1, 2013, and the green areas, which is the balance of Minnesota Street and then the side streets out to 19, as East Side 2, generally keeping the costs the same as they were in the CIP for the 2 phases. The reason we put that together is this Public Works has several water and sewer issues in Water Street and in Vine and Cedar and Grove. They've got a couple mains that they have trouble cleaning. They have several water main breaks. Plus, we have quite a bit of 4-inch water main in this part of the town and several dead ends that need to be looped as best we can. Also, as part of that CIP, we identified all the pavements in town. You'll remember this figure here was also in the CIP, color-coded on the rating of the street surface. Again, phase one of the east side is these streets up in this area, and also Oak, Hoffman, and Vine here on the right south of 19, that little bit of a horseshoe. Those three streets down there are in very poor condition. There's no curb and gutter, and Hoffman is actually gravel for most of that stretch. The streets up here in the rest of East Side 1, the east half of Water Street, Grove, and Almond, and the cul-de-sacs are in pretty good condition, but there again, that's where we have the utility issues. The discussion we had with Public Works as well. These are the utility issues. Yes, the streets are in good shape, but let's work our way out from the back towards 19 with the two phases, leaving the work for the second phase on the east side, the stuff closer to 19. I'd just like to point out that we did not take a look at any sidewalks in this part of the project, other than just any carriage walks that go from this front door out to the street. Those will be replaced if they're taken out during the project, but not any new sidewalk on phase one. This is, again, the map showing the streets in phase one and also the highlighted parcels that'll be benefiting and then ultimately assessed for the improvements. You'll notice we do have a block of Water Street that was left out. I will kind of go through the thinking on how we arrived at that. Originally, we weren't looking at this part of the project, but we do have a storm sewer that discharges onto Cedar Street from 19 and runs overland down to Minnesota, and then also continues down Cedar or goes around the corner down Bridge down to the bike trail where that gets picked up. So as part of this report, we put in some costs to run a storm main up Bridge to Hoffman, and then in phase two we could extend it over in Minnesota over to Cedar to pick that pipe up. At this time, we weren't sure which way we would go, if we go up Water and Cedar or if we go up Bridge. It looks like we might go up Bridge, so this area got added. The water and sewer mains in Water Street are in good condition once we get west of the 400 block, so those aren't, that's why we left that block out originally, and then these three down on the west end got added.
Like I said, we need to look at least resurfacing that one block there. I mean, if we're gonna do the whole street and put new pavement
Right.
there, we need to do the whole street instead of just doing just that one little piece.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not gonna be that costly to do that. I think we
No.
talked earlier, I mean, we're talking maybe $400 to $500 a resident there to pay for that portion of
If we
the
followed
paving.
this assessment, that's probably what we'd be looking at, because it'd just be maybe a
That would just be
overlay
a
there.
mill and overlay.
I think
Yeah.
the curb is in
Yeah.
good shape.
Yeah,
Like I
that's all
said,
in
the
good shape.
utilities are fine. So I can work with Aaron on that, on how we procedurally handle that with the report and moving forward, getting that into the plans. But that's a good point. I just wanted to point out why there's a blank there in that such a street. It looks a little funny if you look at it just on its own. Talked a little bit about the sanitary sewer and then the water main. In Oak Street, we've got a 12-inch water main that comes up from the main down by the river all the way up to 19 and ties into that 12-inch there. The rest of it to the east is 4 and 6 inch, like I said. We've had several blocks where they've got issues with breaks, and we'll be upsizing it all to 6 inch and looping where we can, which is what we'll do in Cedar. And then also in Grove, we'll be looping those two blocks together to try to improve some flow and circulation. The storm sewer, shown on
One thing,
figure.
Greg, with the flow thing up there, I know you got a couple spots up there where there's two houses on one line or something going on. But basically, the system that was in there was designed and worked pretty good. And it isn't like we can go anyplace else up there. We got the hillside, we can't develop that. And if we would develop it someday, it's gonna come off the top up there by the well. It's not gonna come from down below. So really, on this particular project, if we just replace the system and replace some of the undersizing, the system is adequate for
Right.
what's there, right?
Right, the sewer, we're not anticipating having to increase the sewer size. That area's built out. There's no need for any bigger pipe than 8 inch, which is the minimum size you can put in per the PCA. And then again, with the water, it's 6 inch to get away from some of the smaller mains, but nothing over that is needed, just more or less to get things looped back together. Like I mentioned earlier, the storm sewer shown on figure 6, we've got two storm systems or two storm mains that run down. One runs down Almond, the other runs down Grove. kind of handles the eastern part of the project. The rest of it kind of flows overland, east and west. There's kind of a break point here somewhere in the 400 block. We'd probably add a few catch basins here. Some of this storm sewer will have to come out when we replace the water and sewer just because of the proximity of it to the sanitary. We'll put it back. And like I said, I talked about the storm sewer down here at Bridge with the goal to serve that flared end section in Cedar. And then just some catch basin improvements down on that south portion, just down by 19 and on Grove. Just maybe rebuild the catch basins and add one or two. It seems to work fine, and once the new streets are in with curb and gutter, it'll better direct that water right into those structures, so we shouldn't have less water shooting out onto the highway or onto Grove Street. Good news is we have a system in place, unlike the west side, so we don't have to deal with detention ponds or off-site improvements, so we won't have that issue, and I don't anticipate needing any additional easements or right-of-way. I think we can get all the work done within what the city already has. And then just the last figure is the sanitary and water improvements. Like Leroy mentioned here on the south side of 19, we're just looping this water back together, and then all of this is old clay tile sewer. We'll replace it with new PVC and precast concrete manholes. And there again, up on top, the yellow highlighted areas are the sewer improvements, and the more of the yellow is where we're going to be replacing the water main and water services. So putting all those improvements together, we end up with approximately a total cost of $2,950,000. Keeping with the assessment policy, the council approved during the West Side project, we'd assess 20% of that. As I talked about the storm and street improvements, we did come up with two different assessment rates. We were going to follow the per unit method. Last time we discussed per foot and per unit. We're going to go with the per unit method to be consistent with the last project. The folks here on the west side, over down a bridge, we just took those improvements and divided it by the benefiting parcels over there. 20% over the benefiting parcels, and that works out to about $5,061 a parcel. The rest of the project is more of a reconstruct where we're doing new sewer, new water, new street, new storm sewer. Those costs, 20% of those improvements divided by the 78 benefiting parcels works out to $6,396 a parcel right now, the preliminary assessment.
Greg, on your, the 10% contingencies and 20% legal, admin, and engineering, typically how much of that money gets used?
Well, we include the contingencies in at this point because we haven't done the plans. See, the CIP number was about a 30,000 foot view. Now we're at about 15,000 feet. When we get to the plans, we're kind of treetop level, if you will. And so the contingency number would be gone once we have the plans. And the rest of it's kind of based on what's needed to put the plans together, the inspection, the staking, the fiscal numbers with the city, and administration time there. So right now, those are just kind of the placeholders we use just as a percentage, because we'd like to be conservative at this point and back down from it. I think last time the assessments at the preliminary side for the east side or west side were about 57, and I think we ended up about 52, 53.
Yeah.
Oh.
And all those numbers are going to depend on what the final bids come in at.
Well,
If the bids come in lower, then obviously all of our percentages would drop too for that. So, the hope is you get competitive bids and then you see that number go down, and that means everybody's assessment gets lower too.
And then back at page 7 of the report, I just got the schedule tonight here. Council accepts the report, sets the improvement hearing for the 8th. Because of the election, that's the Thursday meeting. There again, I'll run through the presentation. That's a public hearing. For the residents and the benefiting properties will be notified. They'll have a chance to speak to the improvements. At the end of the hearing, if the council chooses to move forward with the improvements, order the improvements, then we would start the plans and specs, work on them over the winter, have it ready for advertising probably February, take bids, maybe award it in March. Like the west side, we'd have the assessment hearing first based on the bids. And then construction May to October. This could easily be done in one construction season, gets us back on an every other year schedule from there on out.
Any questions or concerns for Greg?
So roughly $3 million is what this project's running.
I would say we're gonna be under it, but that's kind of the neighborhood we're at right now.
And roughly, we're 5,200 on the west side, and you're kind of around 6,200 on this side? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think the biggest change here is we're gonna have some rock to contend with where we didn't have any rock on the west side. Now, we do have utilities in place, but some of them, as we found out on the Second Street project, the trench was just big enough for the pipe to replace it. We had to build a 3-foot trench, so we factored in rock excavation based on the soil borings. And that's where I think some of the costs we see are gonna be higher than what the west side had, because we didn't have to deal with rock. And that's probably the biggest change, or difference, I would say.
We're gonna go with any options as far as alternates from cast iron versus PVC, or what are we gonna do?
That's something we've discussed with Public Works. At this point, the prices we have in there would be reflective or conservative for whatever pipe material. But when we get to the specs, that's where we call out, whether it's ductile iron on the water main, obviously we're gonna use plastic on the sewer, concrete for the storm sewer. That comes down to more of a maintenance. The water main material is really the question, and that comes down to more of what's Public Works used to, what do they have in town, and what do they like to deal with. I know that a lot more plastic water main has been going in, and it can be located with the tracer wire and different tracing techniques. Sometimes though, once Public Works is used to one thing, it's hard to change. And that plastic pipe has brought down or kept the ductile pipe competitive. So it's something we could do as an alternate bid. Dealing with Public Works, I know they're used to having the ductile pipe, and I think we usually see a pretty favorable price with the ductile, even if we didn't put a comparative bid in for the plastic on the water main. So, that's something the Public Works can talk about.
That ductile iron that's on that Water Street right now, when was that installed? That isn't that old.
Well, I think the western half probably isn't. The stuff to the east, I wouldn't even know what to guess. And the streets aren't that old, so my assumption is the streets were done probably within 20 years, but the utilities, I would say, are older than that.
Yeah, but I don't think the ductile iron is original from the 60s up there, 50s or 60s, is it?
I would think it's probably cast from about that time.
Oh, you think it's that old?
I would think the water and sewer are original from when that neighborhood was developed.
Because I was under the understanding when the new curb and gutter went in, the new water mains went in.
What the televising is showing Public Works is that's still all clay sewer, and the water main breaks they've had have been cast. But once you start getting west of the 400 block or Oak Street, that's where we have plastic sewer based on the televising, and we have newer water main. So that must have been the dividing point or the stuff that went into the
Plastic
west.
started?
Yeah.
Have we had any breaks in that ductile iron where the plastic started?
No, that's why we ended up with this gap here. Public Works didn't really identify any utility sewer water issues over here. That's why we originally just ended the project here, but with that storm sewer issue, that's why we included another piece.
Well, there's that one there by 412 that usually breaks every winter there on Water Street and starts running down,
Yep.
and they have to come dig that up, so I mean.
Going through my notes from Wes and Ted and Tom, the 400 to 600 block of Water Street, bad water main, lots of breaks, and that same stretch is where they've got sewer issues, and a stretch that when they clean, they have issues with service line going back to the houses, so.
Well, the only thing I would point out is, and I'll leave it alone, is that Hoffman Street and all them streets up there, if that's the original system, that's the same ductile iron that's up on the street that goes to school. And I don't know that they've had that many breaks there. So the Water Street area, for some reason, we got different soil structures. We're going from gravel to rock to back to something else. And I feel that if you go back in there with ductile iron in 25 years, you could still have the same snapping going on. So I think I'd like to see an option on PVC, and that's the only reason is because of the area there. And if it was pure sand, pure gravel, pure clay, I would understand it. It's all got its own flexibility. But when you take ductile iron and you set it on rock, solid rock, and then you go along 50 yards, all of a sudden you run into sand base, you got your different areas, and that's where it's going to stop. You just can't stop it.
Well, that's a discussion Public Works can have at the committee level and the staff level, because we'll have time here as we develop the plans.
How, Rick, hi. How How bad is that compared to what West Side was, would you say?
I think the utility mains are probably comparable. The
right.
streets are probably in a little better shape because there's curb and some storm sewer over there, which we didn't have on the west side project. But the utilities, I think there's one block that Wes said that they clean it, they have issues where it goes back up into the residents' homes. And
On water.
as the mayor mentioned, there's water main that seems to break about every year there in the 400 block,
Yeah.
so.
Now, the price of this would be, to the city, is about, what, 2,300,000 approximately, if you take in the assessments?
Yep.
That would add about, so our debt would be, our debt right now after West Side is what, 18,800,000? And this would make it what, about 21 million something? And there's plans for other projects every 2 years or something, right? Now, how does this fit in, Mr. City Administrator, how does this fit into our payment schedule on all this debt we're gonna get?
It fits in very well if you look at the financial management plan. All this is, counted into that plan when you take a look at it and propose levy increases and things like that. So we've known about these since 2009. So every year when we present that financial management plan, these numbers are included in there. The biggest thing that we all try to remember is that, in about 5-6 years, I think about 80% of our debt rolls off the books. We have a pretty big chunk coming off in that 2018 area. So we're adding things now, but you have to also remember that, unfortunately, cities carry debt. And we have to do these things to keep up our infrastructure.
I'm aware of debt being.
So, we have a large amount of debt now because we did some very large projects within the last 10 years or so. But at the same time, those projects will start coming off the books soon, and we won't have to worry about, wastewater, treatment plant improvements and some of those sort of things. So you're going to see some big chunks coming off. So overall, we'll have a period here, and we've kind of known it as we discussed it, that we'll have adding to that debt load with nothing coming off, but then we will have a point where we'll see a strong decrease in what our debt load is.
Yeah, but for the next 4 or 5 years, how much will the tax levies go up, you think?
Well, if we look at the financial management plan, I think we've had estimates in there anywhere between, I think, like 5 and 7% per year when we take everything into account. But we've also had those same basic increases for the last 2 or 3 years in that plan. But we've always ended up with 0 or less. And that's just because, yes, we're adding debt for this project, but at the same time, then we take a look and we find ways to save in other areas to balance that out. We have kind of these must-do things, which we think these infrastructure projects are. And so to keep things realistic, because we know the council doesn't want to see a 5, 7, 9% levy increase, we make changes in other places to balance that out. So we've done a good job with that so far, and our plan would be to continue doing that.
Like for what? Where would you make some changes? What we've done is we cut some things.
Well, we do, but we generally cut different things every year too, though. We'll have, say, savings on personnel costs one year, and then the next year we'll take a look at our capital needs, and we won't need as much in capital, so we'll see a reduction in our capital costs. Then, like this year, we're adding back in the seal coating program, which was something we cut for a few years because we didn't need it. So now to help balance that out, we'll find somewhere else to balance it with.
Well, and
So-
we also, hopefully at our next meeting, when those bonds are reissued, we have some savings built
Yep.
in.
There will be savings with
We'll
the
see
bonds
debt
being
service there.
refinanced.
I think the hard part now, when we do our budgets, is that, one, we never really have a fixed revenue side of things, because we really don't know for sure from the state long-term what we're going to get and some of those sort of things. So we make these long-term plans with a financial management plan, but we also understand that we have to adjust those on a yearly basis to meet our needs at that time. So we know that infrastructure is an important part of what we do as a city and provide it. So when we do these sort of projects, that means as staff in the council, we've got to work out a way to then kind of balance that out. Because we understand what an acceptable level is as far as levies, which is basically as little as possible, changes. So what we're doing then is we look each year at what can we cut for this year to make it work for this year. And then for the next year, we'll do the same thing. Some things will have to be put back in, but other areas hopefully we can save from. So we kind of do this balancing act through the whole thing, and so far it's worked.
So far, it's worked.
Yeah.
But in the future, you have to speculate on what the needs of the city will be and what the pressures on the budget will be.
Yep.
And how much you'll be able to spend, because you have a few bad years, could throw off your time sheet. a little bit.
Exactly, and that's why when we bring things forward, we really want to make sure that they're projects or purchases that we think are necessary. And, I think the council has kind of made clear that infrastructure is a key component to what the city has to do, and it's important, and We've really neglected certain areas, as you can see, just by going through town and the infrastructure we have for a number of years, because councils didn't want to deal with it, and they did put it off. And, you know, the issue is there may be some short-term pain, but long-term, by getting it done now, we will save money.
Well, I don't know if we'll save, it depends, we'll save anything. But as I explained to Bill, I think it was last month in the post office, as I explained to Councilman Duncan, you know, our main job is the collection and dispersal of taxpayer money, but 3 responsibilities come from that. One is infrastructure, one is services, and they're separate, and the third is our fiscal posture. It's like a spider web. You touch one strand and the whole web quivers, you know, so they're all connected by something. But my main concern is the level of debt and the future tax levies that we might be incurred by, you know, we might have to pay off.
Yep. No, and
Is there
that's
gonna be
true. I mean,
higher?
we are incurring, you know, obligations. So by doing a project like this, we will have long-term obligations to pay for it. But then it's council and staff's responsibility to balance those out with the rest of our budget to keep it in line. You know, if these are priorities, and the council, I think, thinks they are, then we have to possibly look at other areas that we think are not as high priority to make our reductions in. You know, we haven't had to, you know, we've done, you know, a number of changes and a number of reductions, and some have been difficult. And that, I'm sure, actually will have to continue in the future. That we'll have to make some more of those decisions, but, you know, as priorities go, when we look at these sort of projects, I think delaying them just will, you know, end up costing us more money long-term.
They might.
Yeah.
I think,
mean, that's, you know, that's
you're
what we're,
right.
that's what we're looking
I
at, you know,
think-
in the future.
Well, I'm glad you are. But I'm glad that you're doing that, and I think you might be right. But there's just one more point I'll make. Yeah, these things are important. Infrastructure is important to make these things. But when you pay for something, you say it's going to get a low bid, for example, because of the economy and everything, which didn't work out with the library, by the way, but didn't seem to work too well. But, I mean, if you say you have low bids or something, and it's still a burden to pay for it, is one thing. But if you have a little bit higher bids, but you have more money in the future to pay for it, it's not a burden, then that's better. But I understand your point, and it's well taken, that these projects are necessary. And the feasibility report shows that Eastside does have some problems, does have some definite water and sewer problems in there.
You know, Phil, everything you're bringing up, I have thought about. If anything in this thing, I would almost been more interested in doing this project here than I would the west side. If we're gonna be financially nervous and back off, I would say the demand for this east side is actually more than what we did up on the west side. But we started there, and I have no problem with that. So I would see nothing wrong with eliminating, doing this east side project, and if the council felt that is enough money that we've fixed things for so many years, and putting it on hold till some of these other things come off in 5 years, I'd have no problem with that. Except for the fact that I'll point out is that this east side project, we don't even have paved streets up there, and it's been for years. And we're having these water mains shear off, so this is an important project to update things. And then if we want, the rest of our infrastructure is fairly good, it isn't what it should be, but if we said we wanted to back off, I'd be open to something like that.
Well, you know more about sewers and water than I do, Leroy. I have to say, I'm not an expert on that. But if we do vote for this, I would be, I think, in favor of the council backing off a little bit, perhaps setting back some things for a year or two. But
Yep, and I think we've said that each time we bring a project up, we'll review it and say, you know, what's the need, do we do it now or not? So, you know, we've got a plan after this one, and that in 2015, we move on to West Side 2. So in 2015, we'll have to have that conversation. Is it needed now? Should we push it off to 16, push it off to 17? You know, we have it worked into the plan every 2 years, and we know that we have 2 high priority areas, you know, which is what we're tackling, the west side and the east side. After that, the priorities start dropping as far as need, but that's why they were structured that way. So in a couple of years, you know, we'll review West Side 1 again, and or West Side 2, and we'll decide, is that, you know, project we do at 2015, we push it off. So yeah, we'll have to review these each time. Just because they're in the plan doesn't mean they're set. Obviously, we have to go through this whole process to determine if we want to do it or not. And, you know, who knows? Council at that time may say, no, we want to push it off a year or two, but you know, that's something we'll address each time.
And I understand, Phil, what you're saying. The thing is, when you do push something off for a year or two, that year or two has a tendency to become a decade or two. And in the case of some of these things, it's been 3 or 4 decades. And we can't allow that. That would be shirking our duties.
Well, one thing that just irritates me on this whole thing is 15 years ago, they did water and sewer down by my house. And I had sewer, and I had curb and gutter, I had everything. And when they got all done, my assessments were $9,000 apiece. On my 2 lots, it was $18,000 bucks. That was a lot of money back then, 15 years ago. But that was the building boom, and that was the crazy things that were going on. That was the pricing of things. So to come back now and I watch the West Side project, can they get it for $6,000 or less? It's pretty irritating. And I keep thinking, if in 5 years or 10 years we held this off, and then things are that crazy again, now we come back and assessments are $12,000 apiece. How do we know all this stuff?
Right.
All we can do is try to do the right things, go with our gut feeling. Yeah, I'm sure things are going to be a little higher than they were 2 years ago because the demand is up. But it's basically an update of infrastructure in this particular project that we really need.
I agree. At this time, the chair will take a motion to approve the attached resolution receiving the feasibility report and calling for a public hearing on the East Side 1 improvement project.
So moved.
I will second that.
Motion by Merle, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
This time, we'll move on to item 7C, the County Cal Library Contract Meeting.
So basically, where we're at with this whole library contract thing is that it is up at the end of this year. We have our current agreement with the county. And basically what that agreement with the county says is that the county will pay X amount of dollars to the cities to, because we do provide library services to non-city residents. Our contract's up at the end of this year. We've been meeting as cities to discuss negotiation, and we've also met once with some representatives from the county. I've been this is my third contract negotiation with Goodhue County with their contract. It's always been difficult. We've always kind of faced some uphill issues with it. You know, basically where we're at right now is, if you just kind of look at things as fairly simple, if it costs us $1 to check out an item for a citizen, our citizens pay $1.30 to check out an item, and county residents pay 70 cents. That's basically where it's at now. What our goal is, and the county, you know, has been very receptive to this after a while too, is to get that closer to equal dollar for dollar. Since it's the same service, everybody should pay the same price. The county has been very good over our last 2 contracts in providing us with fairly substantial increases to what they have been paying us. The issue has been is that we originally started really low. So it's been a slow battle. They have been giving us good increases. We are getting, you know, closer and closer. But, you know, still, the county has some issues with it. They have their concerns about, well, we're giving you money, but we don't have control over your budgets, you know, those sort of things. So we've asked the county many times, what would be fair to you? We would actually rather not have these contract negotiations every 3 to 5 years. We would prefer that we could agree on maybe some sort of formula. And each year we use that formula, plug in the numbers, and the county pays us their share. We have ours, we're all done. But, you know, the county hasn't really been able to give us an answer what they want. So basically after our last meeting, we said, okay, we've never actually met with the whole county board. It's always been either 1, 2 members and some staff. So what we're doing is the county has asked that we come to their committee of a whole meeting, which is kind of like a work session for the county board. And we're going to, what the cities have asked is that we each send representatives to attend. So besides staff, we'd like to see 1 council member and 1 library board member attend this meeting, and we'll have a couple of representatives from elected officials speak with the county board, since the county board tends to prefer to speak to elected officials rather than us, appointed officials, so that's fine. So they'll do that, but you know, basically all we're asking for is direction from the county board. If they don't like what they're paying us now, and they don't like the contract they have right now, what do you want from us? We don't know. We seem like we always negotiate against ourselves because the county just says, well, we don't like this. And our assumption is they don't like it because they don't want to pay us as much. The current contract right now says that if we don't come to an agreement on a new one, the contract proceeds as is until a new one's negotiated, and the county has to pay us the same increase that they paid us last year. So they would have to pay us a 4% increase, which is what we got in 2012. They'd have to pay us to 2013, and technically that would go on forever. Until we get a new agreement in place. The county, for whatever reason, budgeted a flat payment to the cities, the same as last year. Why they would budget less than what they have an assigned agreement before is, I don't know, but we reminded them at their meeting that if we don't come to an agreement, we expect them to honor their contract and pay us that 4% increase, not what they've budgeted, which is a 0% increase. So anyways, it's very complicated. The county, we can't get a good direction from them what they want. It just seems that they want to give us less. That would work out better for them. While we understand that, it doesn't help us to keep subsidizing the service that we provide to township residents for the services. So we need to figure something out. So what we're asking is kind of, I guess it's our show of force by having everybody send a couple of representatives, elected officials, council members and library board members, is that letting the county know that we think this is important. Obviously, we have very tight budgets right now, as the county does too, but for our citizens to continually subsidize the cost to provide the same service to non-residents is difficult. And we want the county to recognize the fact that we're not asking for anything special, we're just asking them to pay their fair share. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. So what we'd ask for tonight is that if the council would select someone to attend the committee of the whole meeting, and it's on the 16th at 9:45 a.m. County boards meet during the day. So
Who on the council serves with the library board?
I do.
Phil does.
I think we have our volunteer.
Who's going down there? Are you going?
Yeah, I'll go, Justin will go, the county, or the library board will appoint one of their members to go,
Okay.
and then we'll have a council member to go. So.
Okay.
So do you need a motion to appoint
Yep,
Phil?
I'd like that.
Yep.
I'll make a motion to appoint Phil to attend the Goodhue County Cow meeting.
I have a motion and a second to appoint Councilmember Hammes to the meeting on October the 16th, to the Cal meeting. Any further discussion?
Hey, Aaron, so just a quick one, Robbie. If we don't do anything and arrive at anything, it just stays the same as it was last year.
They got to pay us 4% every year.
Yeah.
So every year,
So it'd be the same as last year plus 4%.
yep,
So if we don't negotiate or do anything, it doesn't go backwards anyway,
Nope.
right?
nope.
And that's all good. I want to move ahead, but wouldn't there be some reason for us both to get this resolved then? I mean,
Well, yeah, there definitely is. I mean, for the cities, 4% unfortunately is not going to keep up. I mean,
Right.
it's just our costs just keep going up, and 4% will continually keep that separation going. So we'd like to see more than that. I mean, at least we have something in there, but, that's something the county agreed to at their last one. It wasn't something we slipped in. I mean, we had the conversation that these negotiations are not always easy, and they tend to sometimes drag into the next year. So to account for that, let's at least include the fact that you'll pay us some increase if we can't get it worked out. So they knew about it. Why they're not recognizing it now is beyond me. But, yeah, I mean, at least we get something more as it continues forward, but it's not something that we think is a long-term solution to keep just saying 4% forever.
right, but at least it isn't like Plenty
Right.
and they didn't cut us 40% or
Right.
something.
Well, if they wouldn't have had a contract, they would have.
All right, thank you.
I just want to say that the county has tried with the trail board to decrease their payment or not meet their contract payment. And we've always argued against it, and they've always paid what they're supposed to be paying. So I would hope that they would hold true for the library board.
So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. That brings us to item 7D, which is to extend the summer watering credit.
Yep, they had a conversation at Public Works Commission today, just because we've had this extended kind of dry period here towards the end of summer into fall. We've done this in the past, where if weather dictates, we'll extend that watering credit for another month, just to help citizens out, because we know that they're gonna have to do excessive watering on yards and, those sort of things. So the Public Works Commission recommends that the council go ahead and authorize to extend it out through the end of October. Currently, it ended at the end of September.
One of the biggest concerns we had out there was the fire rating, the high fire rating, that if somebody feels they're living along the woods out on 17 and it's better to keep things watered for the fire safety of it, we wanted to extend that credit so that somebody doesn't take risks that way.
Right, and Goodhue and Dakota County both have a fire ban currently, and anybody's paid attention to the news, September this year was the second driest in Minnesota in history.
And they've already got wildfires up in the northwest corner of the state right now tonight, so, and the governor called out the National Guard to help with those, so it's pretty dry around here, so. With that, Chair will take a motion to extend the summer watering credit.
So moved.
Second,
Motion by Merle, second by Bill. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Brings us to item 8, which is reports. Brenda? Greg?
Just a quick update, we did get the final lift of pavement on the west side last week. Now we're just finishing up a few miscellaneous cleanup punch list items, and bring in some bills here, some final pay-ups in the next month or two, and that should close us out.
Thanks. Officer?
Just a couple things. As you guys are aware, it's homecoming week. We encourage all residents, any suspicious activity, to report it. We do have a lot of theft of property from houses lately. Last several nights have been kind of high for us. So if you see something that doesn't belong, please give us a call. Also wanted to point out there's no parade this year, so none of the streets that are usually closed on Friday will be closed. They'll be open. And we actually have some patience Friday night on the football game. Increased traffic along Main Street. Right by 7th there, we get a lot of parking complaints, so please feel free to call. We'll take care of them. But we just also ask for patience and to slow down that area. So that's all we have on our end.
Thanks a lot. Annelle? Merle?
Nothing.
just to carry on with the library contract discussion, and I think a few years ago I mentioned this because I'm a little peeved that people outside of town get a benefit that we pay more for. And maybe the library board in their wisdom might want to start considering some sort of fee structure for those outside the city to make this, especially with a new library.
We've talked about that as a large group level with all the cities. So if for whatever reason we have issues with contract negotiations here at the county, that is our bargaining position, is that we have to somehow make up the money, so we have to figure out how to do that. So there's some statutory limitations to what we can do potentially with charging, but we can, we feel, do some things about limiting of services that would better reflect what they're paying for. So yeah, it's part of the conversation. We've got that I hope we don't have to use it, but it may be something we have to move towards, yeah.
All right, and then the Public Works Commission met this afternoon, and most of the items we've already discussed on the various council things, so that's it.
Leroy?
Nothing, thank you.
Bill?
Just one thing, people keep telling me that the water bills are too high here. I don't know if you've received that information yet, Aaron, or not, but they keep telling me this. I just have to point out some statistics. In the last 12 years, water bills have gone up in, I think, Atlanta, Georgia, 240%, and in Rapid City, South Dakota, 140%. Water bills are going up high everywhere. They're going up high everywhere. Potable water is getting more and more valuable. And the other two things I'd mention is, you have to remember we're under a tier system. In part, our water bills are regulated by the state. Is that not true, Aaron? So we're not completely in control of that. And unfortunately, we have to keep up our fund balances. So that's all I can tell you, citizens. That's the way it is.
Thanks. I'd just like to say the city Public Works Department did the city cleanup on Saturday, and they did a real good job. There weren't any traffic issues. By the way, they had people coming in. I know there weren't quite as many people that brought stuff in this time, but they did get quite a bit of stuff. And I just want to say thank you to the Public Works staff for the job that they did putting that together, and the city staff from City Hall here that helped out. And it was another successful make sure some of that junk doesn't end up on our streets. Other than that, be careful out there because we got a lot of folks coming to town for the homecoming game this weekend, and thanks a lot to our police department for making sure everybody stays safe. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.